Hello, I'm Mrs. Ragle, and this is your Unit 1 Decimal Review. Keep in mind that your test is this Friday, September 22nd. All right, let's jump right in. Converting fractions and decimals. Complete the following table. Round decimals to the nearest thousandths place. Write fractions in simplest form. We start out with two fractions that we have to convert to decimals. And keep in mind that there are two different ways to convert a fraction to a decimal. The first being that we scale a fraction up or down so that the denominator is a power of 10. That's like 10, 100, 1000. We use that power of 10 as place value for our decimals. The other option is to divide the numerator by the denominator. So we look at our first example, 1/6. 6 does not scale nicely up or down to a power of 10, so we're going to divide the numerator by the denominator. We recall that 1/6 is the same thing as 1 divided by 6. So we put our divisor on the outside, our dividend on the inside, add our decimal point after the whole number, and a few zeros to divide. We bring the decimal straight up in the quotient and begin. 6 goes into 1 0 times. 6 goes into 10 1 time. When we subtract, we get 4, and we bring down a 0. 6 goes into 40 6 times. 6 times 6 is 36. We subtract, we get 4, and bring down a 0. 6 goes into 46 times. 6 times 6 is 36. And again, we see that a pattern is emerging. If we continue to divide, bringing down a 0, we would see that this decimal repeats. In the instructions, we're asked to round decimals to the nearest thousandths place. So if we divide to one decimal past the thousandths place, that is this one here, we can use it to round our decimal. So 0.1666 and so on would round to 0 and 167 thousandths. Our next problem is 5 and 12/20ths. We need to convert this fraction to a decimal, but we can see with a denominator of 20 that we can either scale this fraction up to have a denominator of 100, or we could scale this fraction down to have a denominator of 10, both of which we can use for place value. So I'm going to start by taking this mixed number, and I have to remember when I write mixed numbers as decimals that that whole number in the front remains the same. The and part of what we say is represented by the decimal point, and then all we need to do is convert that fraction portion to a decimal. 12/20ths is equivalent to 6/10ths if we divide both the numerator and denominator by 2. And 6/10ths as a decimal is 0.6. We take that decimal and we write it up at the top with our whole number, and 5 and 12/20ths is equivalent to 5 and 6/10ths. Now we get into our decimals. We're first given 7 and 98/100ths. The key to converting a fraction to a decimal is to use, decimal to fraction, is to use place value and to write it as though we say it. So 7 and 98/100ths as a fraction would be 7 and 98 out of 100. Now we can take the fraction and write it in simplest form. If you're not sure of the greatest common factor, remember you can always start by simplifying, dividing by a smaller number like 2 or 3. If we divide this by 2, we get 7 and 49/50ths. And just by dividing by 2, our solution is in simplest form. Our next decimal is 500ths. 5/100 again we write as though we say it. 5 out of 100. Then we simplify the fraction. We see that the numerator and denominator share a common factor of 5, so we're going to divide both by 5. And our fraction is in simplest form. 5/100 is equivalent to 1/20. In Part B, we're ordering decimals, writing them in order from least to greatest. In number 1, we're given a mixture of fractions and decimals. When you're given different representations of a number, you can choose to rewrite all fractions as decimals or all decimals as fractions. You could even use percents if you'd like to compare. I see that we have all decimals with the exception of 4/10 and 1 1/2, both of which can be easily written as decimals. So I'm going to start by rewriting 4/10 as 0 and 4/10, and 1 1/2 as 1 and 5/10. Now I'm going to use those to order from least to greatest. But if you look below, it says that we can place the answers, or we should place the answers on the number line from number 1. So I'm going to use the number line to help me place these decimals in order from least to greatest. Starting with 1 7/10, I see that the number line is split into tenths. That is, between each whole number, there are 10 even segments. So I can count over 7 places to get 1 7/10 from the whole number 1. And we place 1 7/10 here. Next, 1 15/100. 15/100 falls between 1 1/10 and 1 2/10. So if I count over, 1 15/100 would fall approximately here. Please forgive my handwriting in this video. Next, we have 4/10. 4/10 would be 4 places from the whole number 0. So if we count over 4 places, 4/10 is approximately here. Next, we have 2 65/100. 2 65/100 falls halfway between 2 6/10 or 60/100 and 2 7/10 or 70/100. So we count, and our 2 65/100 falls approximately here. Next, we have 39/100. 39/100 falls just to the left of 40/100 or 4/10 on the number line. I'm going to use a different color to show the difference between 4/10 and that 39/100. So it'll be slightly to the left. Here is 39/100. Finally, we have 1 1/2, which is the same as 1 5/10. So 1 5/10 would fall 5 places from the whole number right, or whole number 1. All right, and just by using the number line, we have our decimals and fractions in order from least to greatest. Now for number 2. We are given a series of decimals, and we need to order them again from least to greatest. This time we're not going to use the number line, but rather we're going to consider place value. So when we're ordering decimals, we start on the far left. We consider the whole number, which we see for all of these decimals is 0. Then we move to the tenths place. So in the tenths place, we have 2 decimals that have a 0. So we've got to decide which is greater. If we rewrite this 0 6/100 to have the same number of place value as the 62 thousandths, we see that 60 thousandths is less than 62 thousandths. So our smallest number for number 2 is 0 and 60 thousandths, or 600ths, followed by 0 and 62 thousandths. I'm going to mark these off as I go. Now if we go back to our decimal point and look to the right, the next number that would fall in line would be our 0 and 1600ths, because there is a 1 in the tenths place. After that, we look again at our decimal point and to the right at the tenths place, and we see we have 2 decimals with a 7 in the tenths place. We can rewrite this 7 tenths to have the same digits in place value as the 75 hundredths by adding a 0. 70 hundredths is less than 75 hundredths. So our 0 and 7 tenths would come before our 0 and 75 hundredths in order from least to greatest. That leaves us with one more decimal. This is our greatest given, 0 and 98 hundredths. This brings us to Part C, multiplying decimals. We recall that when multiplying decimals, we multiply as though the decimals are whole numbers, then we go back and add in the decimal places to our final product. We also learned that it helps to estimate your product first to check for reasonableness. So we can start with number 1, 3 and 5 tenths times 6 and 2 tenths. 3 and 5 tenths is about equal to the whole number 4, whereas 6 and 2 tenths is about equal to the whole number 6. 4 times 6 is 24, so we know that our product of 3 and 5 tenths and 6 and 2 tenths is about equal to 24. Now we multiply. 3 and 5 tenths, we multiply as though it's 35. 6 and 2 tenths, we multiply as though it's 62. Add a 0 as a placeholder. And we add. Then we go back to our original products to check place value. We count over 1, 2 decimal places. So in our final product, starting from the right, we go 1, 2 decimal places, and place our decimal. We see that we have 2 digits to the left of the decimal, 21, and that is close to 24. Now we go on to number 2. 1 and 25 hundredths times 19 hundredths, or 0 and 19 hundredths. We know that 1 and 25 hundredths is about equal to 1, and 0 and 19 hundredths is about equal to 0 if we're rounding to the nearest whole number. 1 times 0 is 0. That means we're looking for a small decimal. So we multiply. 1 and 25 hundredths, we multiply as though it's 125. 19 hundredths, we multiply as though it's the whole number 19. Add our 0 as our placeholder. And we add. Now we go back to our original factors and we count place value. We have 2 decimal points plus 2 more to get 4 decimal points total. Starting from the far right in our product, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal places. Our final answer is 2,375 ten thousandths, which is a decimal close to 0. Finally, for number 3, we have 16 and 2/10 times 9 and 4/100. For this one, I'm going to estimate over here to the side in green. 16 and 2/10 is about equal to 16, whereas 9 and 4/100 is about equal to the whole number 9. When we multiply 16 times 9, we get 144. So we know that our product of 16 and 2/10 and 9 and 4/100 is about equal to 144. So we multiply 162 times 904. Use a 0 as our placeholder. And we add. Now we go back to our original factors to count place value. And we have 1, 2, 3 decimal places in our factors. So starting from the far right, we have 1, 2, 3 decimal places in our product. So 16 and 2/10 times 9 and 4/100 is 146 and 448 thousandths, which is approximately equal to 144. Now we move into Part D, dividing decimals, and we're asked to round to the nearest thousandth. Starting out with number 1, we have 19 and 4/10 divided by 6/10. If we were to write this as long division, our divisor of 6/10 would go on the outside, and 19 and 4/10, our dividend, goes on the inside. Now remember, when we divide, our goal is to rewrite any decimal divisors as a whole number. In order to do that, I would need to move the decimal point one place to the right. In doing so, I am multiplying the divisor by 10. So I must do the same to the dividend in order to keep the quotient the same. Then I'm going to rewrite this problem as 6 into 194. I still need to add my decimal and the whole number, bring it straight up to the quotient, and a few zeros just in case. Now we're ready to divide. 6 goes into 1 0 times. 6 goes into 19 3 times. Bring down our 4. 6 goes into 14 2 times. Bring down our 0. 6 goes into 20 3 times. Bring down our 0. 6 goes into 23 times, and we can start to see our pattern emerge. Remember that we're rounding to the nearest thousandths place, so we need at least one decimal place past the thousandths in order to round. So we continue bringing down zeros. And we see that 19 and 4/10 divided by 6/10 is 32.3 repeating. If we rounded that to the nearest thousandth, that would be about equal to 32 and 333 thousandths. Number 2, 16 and 1/10 divided by 2/10. Our process is the same as the previous problem. We know our divisor goes on the outside, dividend on the inside. We want to rewrite the divisor as a whole number, so we move the decimal one place to the right, or we can say that we are multiplying by 10. Then we rewrite our problem. We have 2 into 161. We still need to add our decimal place in the whole number, bring it up to the quotient, and add a few zeros to divide. Now 2 goes into 1 0 times. 2 goes into 16 8 times. Bring down our 1. 2 goes into 1 0 times. Bring down our 0. 2 goes into 10 5 times. And we can see at this point we would have zeros as we continue to divide. So 16 and 1/10 divided by 2/10 equals 80 and 5/10, or if we wrote all the way through the thousandths place, 80 and 500 thousandths. Number 3, 1 and 536 thousandths divided by 48 hundredths. Again, we start by writing the original problem in long division. Putting our dividend on the inside and divisor on the outside. Then we need to make our divisor a whole number by moving the decimal 2 places to the right or multiplying by 100. So we do the same to our dividend to keep the quotient equal, and we rewrite our problem. This is 48 into 153 and 6/10. Again, I'm going to add a few zeros to divide and bring my decimal straight up to the quotient. So 48 goes into 1 0 times. 48 also goes into 15 0 times. 48 goes into 153 3 times. 48 times 3 is 144. We subtract, we get 9. We bring down our 6. 48 goes into 96 and even 2 times. When we subtract again, we see that we would have zeros in every place after. So 1 and 536 thousandths divided by 48 hundredths equals 3 and 2/10. If we wrote it all the way out to the thousandths, that is 3 and 200 thousandths. Now for our last section, part E, decimal word problems. Here we're going to be looking for keywords to help us know whether or not we are multiplying or dividing. Kira and Eli are close friends that attend Renner Middle School. Kira's home is 4 8/10 miles away from the school. Eli's home is 3.5 times as far as Kira's home from the school. Find the distance between Eli's school and his home. We see that it's 3.5 times as far. That keyword of times tells us to multiply. So we need to multiply 4 and 8/10 by 3 and 1/2. Now when we're given a fraction and a decimal in a word problem, we are free to choose if we write them both as fractions or both as decimals. Because we're focusing on decimals in this portion of the unit, I'm going to write both as decimals. 3 and 1/2 is equivalent to 3 and 5/10. So we are multiplying 4 and 8/10 by 3 and 5/10. To multiply decimals, I write both as whole numbers and multiply. Add a 0 as a placeholder. And add. Then we go back to our original factors to count decimal places. We have 1, 2 decimal places, so we count in from the right in our product, 1, 2, to get 16 and 8/10. So in the end, Eli's home, or the distance between Eli's school and his home, is 16 and 8/10 miles. Number 2, Kate splits a rope that was 49 and 4/10 inches into 4 equal parts. What is the length of each part? Here we see the keyword splits, which tells us to divide. So we're taking this 49 and 4/10 inches of rope and we're cutting it into 4 equal parts. Because the 49 and 4/10 is what is being divided, that is our dividend. And by how much, which is 4 equal parts, represents our divisor. To divide, we place our divisor on the outside, we place our dividend on the inside, and bring the decimal point straight up. We see that our divisor is already a whole number, so we can continue as we are. 4 goes into 4 one time. Bring down our 9. 4 goes into 9 two times. Bring down our 4. 4 goes into 14 3 times. And we need to add a 0. Bring that down. 4 goes into 25 even times. Now with a remainder of 0, we can stop dividing. So when Kate splits that rope, that's 49 and 4/10 inches, into 4 equal parts, each part is 12 and 35 hundredths inches. Number 3, Mrs. Elliott bought 1 5/10 pounds of ground beef. If the price of ground beef is $4.10 per pound, how much did Mrs. Elliott pay total? So here we're given a rate, a cost, per pound, and a number of pounds. This tells us that we need to multiply. So we are going to multiply 1 5/10 by the cost, 4 and 10 hundredths, or 4 and 1/10. Now we multiply those as though they were whole numbers. And I'm going to rewrite this 4 and 10 hundredths as 4 and 1/10, just to make the multiplication a little simpler. We multiply as though it's 41 and 15. And add. Then we go back to our original factors and we count decimal places. We have 1, 2 decimal places, so in our product, we start from the far right and count over 1, 2 places. That means that on 1 1/2 pounds of ground beef, Mrs. Elliott spent $6.15. For our last problem, Mrs. Ragle purchased 12 gallons of gas for $23.82. How much did each gallon cost? For this, we are going to take the total cost and we're going to divide it by the number of gallons purchased. That is 23 and 82 hundredths divided by 12. So we set up our long division, placing our dividend, or what we are dividing up, on the inside and bringing our decimal point straight up. Now we divide as usual because our divisor is already a whole number. 12 goes into 2 0 times. 12 goes into 23 one time. And we bring down our 8. 12 goes into 118 9 times. 12 times 9 is 108. We subtract. Bring down our 2. 12 goes into 102 8 times. 8 times 12 is 96. We subtract. We need to add a 0 and bring it down. 12 goes into 60, a nice even 5 times. And 23 and 82 hundredths divided by 12 is 1 and 985 thousandths. Now the question asks, how much did each gallon cost? Because we're talking about money, we need to round to the nearest cent. 1 and 985 thousandths rounds to 1 and 99 hundredths, or $1.99. And that concludes our review. Best of luck on Friday.